welcome to the Psyched podcast, brought to you by the Women in Psychedelics Network. I'm your host, Kaya Roman, and today I am so psyched to have this incredible woman here with us, Amber Capone. Really honored to be able to have Amber share her story with us. Let me tell you guys a little bit about Amber. She is the co-founder and executive director of VETS, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. Amber has a history of taking, building, and tenaciously seeking solutions to complex challenges. And her story of how she got involved with this organization is very moving. We're going to hear that. So after meeting her husband, Marcus, at Southern Illinois University, she spent over a decade supporting his military career as a U.S. Navy SEAL. And we're going to hear how they came to found VETS, which Amber has successfully built and led from a grassroots movement into a nationally recognized nonprofit that has assisted over 500 veterans and raised over $6 million, adding to the growing body of psychedelic research, and she's a successful advocate for policy change across the U.S. So, Amber, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you from the bottom of my heart and from all of our listeners for your incredible work.
Thank you, Kaya. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm really excited about our chat.
Yeah. Well, you know what I really love about you and Marcus and your story, and I've been blessed to hear you speak a few times in Miami, in Texas with Governor Rick Perry. What I love is that yours is a love story, and you know your love for each other is so apparent and just really beautiful to witness. And like from what I understand, you met in high school or you early college?
Technically, I was still in high school. My dad, of all people, had recruited Marcus to play football for him at Southern Illinois University. And so I was finishing up my senior year, although I was very old for my age, old for my class, and I'd say mature for my age. I met Marcus and instantly was just absolutely head over heels in love and enamored with him. We proceeded to date for a couple of years before he decided he wanted to go into the military, and I just thought that wasn't for me. So we'd actually decided to break up, and then I discovered that I was carrying our son.
Wow.
And so, yeah, life changed really quickly. I think we all grew up really fast at that point, and as a nation after 9/11, which happened very soon after Marcus enlisted in the military and finished SEAL training. He was actually not even quite done with SEAL training when 9/11 happened. So I have been with Marcus for over half my life and absolutely the love of my life. Yes.
Well, thank you, for being so dedicated to loving him. I feel like once everyone hears your story, they're going to understand. It's sort of like your love for this man who came back after his service, suffering so much, has led to the healing for so many people and so many more people to come. So let's hear a little bit about that. Marcus, you had your son. I believe you also had a daughter. And Marcus ended up being in the Navy SEALs for 13 years?
13 years. Yeah.
And he probably saw some pretty hard combat during that time.
He did. He was part of some of the most intense years of the war. And I think that in hindsight, he probably would still be serving if there was a better release valve for the pent up anger, frustration, trauma, stress of the war cycle. There's nothing like it, just to constantly either be preparing for or deploying for war. There's no normalcy, but that had certainly become our normal. And so after those years of service, it was very challenging to be normal.
Yeah.
I totally lost track of what normal was.
So he came home after those years of service, and what kind of symptoms? He was diagnosed with PTSD. I believe you eventually found out he had traumatic brain injury. What kind of symptoms was he experiencing?
Yeah, there was an escalation of symptoms, I would say, while he was still serving on active duty, but everything really came to a head whenever he was no longer in the military. And so it was just this perfect storm of um, needing a break and exiting the military. That was certainly not the break that we needed, because all of a sudden you're out on your own. You don't know how to exist as a family.
Mm,
Your relationship dynamics are completely skewed. Um, you've lost your paycheck, your purpose, your passion, your community, your normalcy, and you're just like out with civilians who you actually become angry with, and no fault
mm,
of their own necessarily, but the civilian life and the military life are completely different. And so there was almost this just this
mm.
gaping chasm of understanding what our family had just lived through, and what so many other families who weren't eh, whose service member didn't come home,
Oh my
what they were
gosh.
living through.
Mm,
It was a very difficult challenge, definitely a very difficult time, and very challenging for us individually and as a couple. His experience with uh, military medicine and the VA was also really frustrating. His symptoms were everything from memory loss, forgetfulness, loss of
mm.
executive functioning, depression, insomnia, flying off the handle, just being very on edge. He was diagnosed with having classic PTSD, but there certainly seemed to be something more.
Mm.
And during the height of our struggles, I learned about blast injury, which is a phenomenon there was a lot of overlap with PTSD, but it's caused from concussive and subconcussive blows to the head. With his
Oh.
15 years of football plus 13 years working with explosives, I knew that this was a very complex issue that
Mm.
was more than just a psychological, overcome it, grit, bear it. It was just, he was having neurocognitive issues that didn't make sense to me.
Wow. And it sounds like you kind of took it upon yourself to figure out what's going on with my husband because the help that you were getting from the medical system wasn't effective.
That's right. Yeah. Even at first, he was doing what was available to him, which was primarily talk therapy and pharmaceuticals. He had been prescribed a number of pharmaceuticals, primarily antidepressants or mood
Hmm.
stabilizers, and that prompted he couldn't sleep. So then it was something for
Mm.
sleep, something to wake up, something for headaches, something for nightmares, something for everything.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he had become this zombie almost, of just
Mm.
this on this medication train constantly. So that wasn't working. There's a lot of provider turnover within the VA. That was very frustrating. But then when I learned about the cumulative nature of concussive and subconcussive injury to the head, I really started to put a focus on brain clinics
Okay.
and diagnostics, and where could we go from here, away from talk therapy and pharmaceuticals.
Hmm.
That was ultimately very frustrating as well, because the diagnostics were great, the follow on was not. And so with every single
Mm.
thing that he tried, as with any case of treatment resistance, and you can imagine, as a high performer by nature,
Mm.
historically, he was able to overcome and accomplish anything, from my perspective, that he set his mind to. So for him to have all of these challenges trying to find relief and not being able to, and he was becoming more and more disheartened and frustrated. And
Mm.
so I felt like time was ticking. I felt like he was very close to throwing in the towel. And
Mm.
I feel that he was thinking it would be better for us if he did that, that he was a burden to his family,
Oh
and
my
that
gosh.
he was never going to get better, and he wasn't
Mm.
used to not being able to attain um, success. And so, yeah,
It's kind of understandable that isn't it something like 20 veterans a day are committing suicide? If
yeah,
so many are coming home feeling like this and there are no great treatment options available for them, then they can start to think, just be easier to check
yeah,
out, which
nothing will ever
is
work.
it's such a
Yeah.
tragedy. And so somehow in your like refusal to give up, both of you, you discovered ibogaine. Is that right? How did you hear about ibogaine?
I was very close to giving up. In fact, I had more
Mm.
or less decided to give up because um, our kids were really suffering.
Mm.
And both of them had been expressing things to me that were indicating that, they were tired too. They were having issues as well. And so our daughter said to me, how much longer do we have to do this? And
Wow.
I thought, even it doesn't matter how tough I am or how much I can take. I am by default subjecting them to this same sort of suffering, and they don't have a choice in this. So I
Hmm.
thought, I've got to choose them. And in doing so, I would almost guarantee that they would be fatherless.
Oh.
And that's a lot to sit with. So as I was making plans to leave Marcus, not ever because I wanted to, but because I thought I had no choice, um, I thought, I've got to know that I've tried everything. At that point, I didn't think anything would work, nor did Marcus. But I wanted to be able to forgive myself in knowing that I had tried everything. And a year prior, I'd heard from a friend and another couple in our community that he had gone out of the country to do ibogaine and had reported that it was significant and a life-changing experience.
Mm.
And so I'd brought it up to Marcus previously. He thought it was crazy. He didn't do drugs. He didn't
Right.
associate with people who did drugs. This was nuts. This was Mexico. This was not science, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And after a year of additional failed attempts and the crisis point that we had arrived at, I reintroduced the idea to him in a way that I had never done before. It was with grace and compassion and a willingness to fight alongside him instead of shaming him or
Mm.
guilt tripping him. I committed to him to doing whatever it takes to continue the fight, but he had to fight with me, and he had to try this one crazy thing, and he agreed to do it. And I don't think either of us were prepared for how effective it was in such a short period of time.
Wow. So he went down to Mexico and he did the ibogaine, and you stayed at home and kind of waited to see what would happen.
I did, but I stayed at home for the dosing portion, and I did fly in on the gray day following. And
Okay.
so I freaked out on the way to see him. And I said to my friend, the spouse of the other SEAL, I said, I cannot see him. I cannot, this is going to break my heart. It will be devastating if it didn't work.
Oh, yeah.
And this was my last hope. And she said, you have to go. He's asking for you. And so when I heard him walking down the hall to see me, it was surreal. And he came around the corner, and instantly, I could tell that his demeanor was different. It was like being reunited with the person that I met when I was 17 and we were, young and in love. And yeah, it was
Wow.
wild.
That fast. And then did
Hmm.
you, I mean, this is just such an amazing story. I'm so glad our listeners are getting to hear this. So, and then did you like work with integration coaches, or how did he do as he came home? Did the changes stuck, I guess?
They did, but we were afraid to speak about them. And it wasn't like
Okay.
every single day was good. It went from probably 80-20 bad good to 80-20 good bad. And when
That's
the
a
bad days
massive
came,
change. Wow.
it was a massive shift. And when the bad days came, I did freak out, like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have let my guard down. It was too good to be true. It didn't work. Like everything else. But he was working ish with a coach. I mean, what he received then and what Vets offers now is night and day.
Yeah.
But what little uh, guidance he was receiving was enough to get back into the medicine experience, regardless of how much time had passed, and remember how he felt then and like root and ground in that, and then stabilize and get back to baseline. And slowly over time, he was able to use those bad days to change his neural pathways, to spend less time in the dip, to pull himself out faster. And I equate it to like the stock market ticker. It's like ups and downs, but over time you're generally trending upward, and maybe your downs are just like less and less. And
Mm-hmm.
then, it's like smooth sailing, and you might have a dip, but then you come right back out. So those downs were necessary, and our life shifted overnight. But even looking back 2 years ago, a year ago, his constant trajectory of self growth, personal growth and change has been ongoing since 2017.
Amazing. So at some
Yeah.
point, you saw this incredible transformation that happened with him, and then you thought, okay, we want every veteran who's suffering to have access to this.
Yeah, he had said to, I guess, the doctor that was attending how many other veterans had been through the program, and
Mm.
it was like practically none.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, "You've got to be kidding me. Everyone I know is struggling to some degree, whether they're talking about it or not. Like,
Mm.
this is such a game changer. More veterans need access to this." And so almost immediately he had the conviction to do more. In fact, he turned to me that very first day that I saw him, or one of the very first things he said to me was, "This is exactly what his teammates needed." And
Wow.
so we ironically were contacted maybe 2-3 weeks later by what would go on to become our first donor. She said, "I want to give to a veteran organization." It was
Oh,
like end of year
amazing.
giving time, but I want to be sure that the funds will be used like to directly support someone and not pay salaries.
Mm.
And Marcus said, "Well, I have an idea. I don't have 501c3 status, but I just had this opportunity last month. I'll tell you, it saved my life, and I have a friend who could use it." And so that's how this started, where she gave, like a $20,000 donation. We gave it to the clinic, and we referred X number of friends to absorb those funds. And then they had the same experiences, and they were referring their friends. And so we started raising more money, but we weren't a dedicated organization yet. We were more or less just a pass through to the clinic.
Right.
So we started to do some due diligence on how to actually set this up right, how to obtain 501c3 status, how to fundraise in a meaningful capacity that was ongoing. And I also wanted 12 individuals to have favorable outcomes, and I wanted 12 months to go by before we were courageous enough, really, it's what it boils down to speak about our experience.
Mm.
And at the 11 and a half month mark, far more than 12 individuals had been through at that point, but at the 11 and a half month mark, right before that year, one of my very close friends' husbands took his life.
Mm.
And when we were sitting at his funeral, which we'd been to that same chapel for countless war funerals, it just hit me that this would be the next wave of funerals to hit our community if we didn't do something. I had feared suicide almost every day for years, yet I was sitting next to Marcus, who was doing remarkably well. And I was sitting at the funeral of someone who I never thought would take his life. And so I just really resigned myself then and there to do whatever it takes to bring this healing to others in our community, but ultimately to all veterans and ultimately to all Americans, because suicide, unfortunately, does not discriminate. We hear about veterans because the statistic is so abhorrent. It's sitting at and has been sitting at roughly 20 a day for years, or if not a decade plus,
Right.
for sure a decade plus. Some reports, a recent report estimated that it could be double that or more,
Mm.
because it's not taking into account maybe veterans that weren't enrolled in VA care, veterans that
Mm.
died by drug overdose and not
Mm-hmm.
by the approved suicide.
Right.
So there's a lot of shortcomings when it comes to the number, but that's just what we hear about in the veteran community. There are so many that are suffering with thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts that
Yeah.
aren't accounted for in those numbers. So the goal was and is to end veteran suicide, but
Yeah.
to impact the entire nation and
Mm.
world, really, and thinking about mental health and truly living in a different way.
Yeah. Wow. And you're doing it. I mean, I'm
Mm,
watching and applauding at your
thank
work, but
you.
to get to that point, you had to find a way to speak about this medicine, whether it's ibogaine or other psychedelics, to, like you said, Marcus originally responded to it, people that think that's drugs, that's bad, that's how is that going to solve my problems? There's still a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, stigma. How did you kind of break through that membrane and start speaking about it? I mean, I
My
know you saw the
strategy
need, but I guess what I'm really asking is how do you describe it in a way that makes it acceptable to people who never would consider this type of treatment?
My strategy from the very beginning was to first establish the efficacy amongst, and the period of time, so the 12 and
Right.
12. And from there to grow the trust within the community,
Mm,
the anecdotal real world evidence that we were seeing on a daily basis, the chorus of voices that we would inevitably need down the road to support what we're doing, and then the organization as a whole. So over the course of the last almost 6 years, we've taken vets from this passion concept into an organization that really is moving the needle, and we're able to pivot the messaging in a way that resonates with both sides of the aisle, and really resonates with all Americans, whether or not they agreed with the global war on terror then or now. Everyone generally seems to agree that anyone willing to die for this nation should be able to receive access to meaningful care here in the borders of it.
right.
And we've centered our messaging around ending veteran suicide
Hmm.
and doing whatever it takes.
Hmm. Yeah. So powerful.
Yeah.
And it is beautiful, that veterans sacrifice their lives to, do what the rest of us aren't going to go do. And that I feel like because you're right, who doesn't want to support veterans and who doesn't want to end veteran suicide? It's like something everyone can agree on that I think it's like through veterans that so much of the change for the laws of psychedelics are actually going to happen. So once
Yeah.
again, they're like serving our country,
Serving.
which is amazing, just that they have so many veterans come back and are suffering, but through that suffering, a lot of good is coming. So what I want to let people know is that now, since 2019, I believe, Vets has provided grants for now over 500 veterans.
Actually, if you add up the grassroots portion, which we don't count in our vets numbers, but vets is over 700 now funded to leave the US, which is
That's
unfortunately
it's pricey, and
terrible.
yeah,
But it's pricey. But just having
and
to go through
yes,
the
and it's terrible that
logistical.
they can't do it in this country. But that's amazing.
Right.
You've been able to send over 700 to Mexico. You include the sort of preparation, the treatment, and then some follow-up support as well.
Yeah. If you count the grassroots portion of our existence, it's actually over 800. Um, and we've gone from just being able to provide a grant to leave the US or a partial grant to now this comprehensive wraparound program that offers preparation, breathwork training, meditation training, integration, one on one integration with our incredible team of coaches, peer support, group integration, workshops, community platforms, spousal support, print materials, e-courses. Like it's never ending. And we have veterans that are really just like, how can I get in your program? I don't even need the subsidy. I
Yeah.
just need the support,
Yeah.
because it really is the crown jewel of vets.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Everybody needs this. And What
Yeah.
I read on your website is that you also provide the support to spouses. Is
It
Can you
would,
tell me about
yeah,
that? So
absolutely.
people apply for these grants, right?
Yeah, we can provide funding. We're, of course, donor dependent. Every dollar counts. And so, depending upon our funding reserves any given year, we can support roughly 200 to 250 veterans to come through our program. We're also offering the ongoing support for the hundreds of other veterans that are already in our program.
Hmm.
So, growing exponentially. Unfortunately, we have to turn down the vast majority of applications that we get. But once someone applies and they're identified as being a good candidate for our program, their spouse is then eligible for a grant or partial grant to seek their own healing as well. And not, we don't ever say that psychedelics are a one size fits all, a magic bullet, right for everyone.
Right.
We offer support for spouses away from medicine. We have spousal support groups happening all throughout the week. We've got something going on at vets 6 days a week. So spouses are they take up about 3 of those 6 days. So we're really trying to support one-on-one in group settings. And what we saw early on is that when the veteran returned home with any level of stability, it could actually trigger the spouse in ways that they were not prepared for, whether it was anger and resentment or a complete disconnect with this new person,
Mm.
that came home, or just having feeling so much relief that it was suddenly safe to break.
Right.
They've been carrying a lot for a really long time.
Right.
And so we're very I went through something like that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was the one who arranged for Marcus to leave. So, it's a lot for the
Yeah.
spouse.
Well, thank goodness you've been through it, so you understand, and it's just really beautiful to see you and Marcus taking your struggle and turning it into a way to help thousands and I'm sure, eventually millions of people. So I want to talk about your visits to Capitol Hill. What are you doing to actually change laws? You are like at the forefront here.
Well, yes, thank you. And it's probably the most exciting emerging element of our mission, certainly taking a front seat right alongside our programs. And the reason why is because of what I mentioned a few minutes ago. We receive far more applications than we could provide funding for. We've
Yeah.
unlocked a need that simply cannot be met by one organization or, 100 organizations like us. There are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of veterans that are really struggling right now. And we
Mm,
need the help of the federal government.
yeah.
One of the veterans that was with us recently on Capitol Hill said, "You sent us over there. We fought really hard. Some of us made it back. Now, what are you going to do about that? What are you
Right.
going to do with us?"
Yeah.
So, and then, if there's something that's working, we should at least be researching it in the
Yeah.
veteran and potentially active duty population. We know it's working. So we need at least federal funding to unlock dollars for more research because veterans are largely excluded from studies happening around the US. Um, you know, through academic institutions and
Hmm.
whatnot, because they're looking for a very clean population and a
Right.
very one diagnosis and one potential treatment. Veterans
Hmm.
oftentimes present with multiple diagnoses
Yeah.
and a history of treatment resistance, as well as many times some degree of suicidal ideation. Some have had suicide attempts.
Hmm.
Um, so they would automatically be disqualified from study. So the meetings that are happening on Capitol Hill that we've been part of, really we're educating first and foremost, and we're setting the stage for an eventual ask of federal funding to further the research. So it's going very well.
Oh, that's amazing. So, how can we all support your work? Please tell us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the podcast because raising awareness is first and foremost. As I mentioned earlier, we are completely donor dependent. So all of the funding coming in to support veterans directly build it and expand and continue our programming, and then put more of an emphasis on advocacy is what fuels our mission. So vetsolutions.org is our website. And, we've got a free e-course there where anyone interested in psychedelics, especially psychedelics and veteran issues, can take the course for free. And then there's also, of course, the donate button for anyone who might be inclined to give.
Vetsolutions.org. Let's all go and click on that donate button. Really, I am so grateful, and I'm sure I speak for many, many, that we are so grateful for your work. And like I started with, it really is so beautiful that it started as a love story, and it's a love that is healing so many people, and we really need that healing. So thank you for being such an advocate, such a powerful voice for change. And please, everyone, vetsolutions.org, let's keep these guys going and get it so that they don't have to turn away so many applicants. Thank you, Amber, for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate this.
All right, bye.